Hello. Allow me to set up some of this stuff. I want to put the chat window on screen and do some things like that, which is done this way. Boop. There we go. Alrighty. So that should have us going. Oh, the one thing I did not get around to doing, well, usually what I do is try to go and check on my Patreon, and that determines the amount of time, so we'll just like run over because I know that some of it went away, and I'll just pretend that it didn't and go with what we were doing last week. So that's fine, and it's okay if some of that went away. That's not a problem. It's just a thing, you know. Let me also undistract myself by pausing the little moving picture of me. So hey, this is Chris from Airwindows, and I'm doing my live stream. You might notice it's not quite as bright as it was in my plugin post because I don't have all my lights going because it's stupid hot again. And we'll just have to live with that. But what else is hot is my little list of plugins. So I thought I would call this stream Old AUs, and we can talk about some of these things that I have put up for download now, if you would like. My little bitty list of the new plugins available. And that said, I've also got my paper and a marker here for if we ended up talking about technical subjects or if I need to explain something having to do with one of the plugins. And yeah, Jolie Burrish asking which of my plugins is best for removing DC offset. You know, I would have to say biquad, or perhaps biquad 1/2. Because the thing about that is that if you set it very, very low with like, I don't know, Butterworth cutoff or something like that, it's way better at completely obliterating super DC than even previous DC removal plugins that I made. So honestly, I would say that. And, you know, another possibility is just straight up biquad, because it's not like it's doing some kind of interesting mid-range thing where it would matter that it was interleaved, because of course biquad 1/2 is interleaved. I think instead it becomes just do your normal filter thing and set it so it's taking out any DC and is still letting through all of the bass that you need. So yeah, I think that my answer there would be biquad. And mixed by Pritchard, I think there's a link to that on my website or whatever. You don't have to rush to throw money at me by PayPal. I'll be fine. But I do believe there is a link. And I'm trying to remember. I need to drink some more of my coffee. Clearly, I'm not bouncing to alertness. I'm trying to remember whether I had a special like PayPal.me. I think PayPal.me .me/Airwindows reaches me. But yeah, for the time being, I'm not really worried about that. Don't worry about it. I am somewhat distracted. As you can see, I've been moving around the things in my modular synthesizer. I basically am in the process of wiring up lots of little tiny cables with just solid core wire for the purpose of some of the cabling needs to be permanent. Like what I have in mind is running some of the timing, running some of the control circuits in a permanent way, because I'm finally getting some clarity on where I'm going with that. And the watchword with that is Space House. In fact, I had an interesting experience driving to the grocery store. I was heading into Keene because I had a superfluous air conditioner that I wanted to give to somebody who could use it while it was still summertime. And I ran across somebody who's like in a recovery community, somebody who's like clean and sober, not using drugs and stuff. And while I was heading in, I was listening to like old jams from back when I was doing that a couple of months ago. Like a few years, I got into this zone where I was trying to escalate it and I was trying to get more attention for the music that I was doing. And a bunch of stuff was about to boil over. So basically, I had to fall back and woodshed, like reconsider things. But I had been listening to a jam that I had simply titled Deep House while making an MP3 of it for the car. And I was like, yep, that's kind of what I had in mind. Maybe not exactly what that genre is. And then there was one that was being called techno, and I was like, okay, slightly faster tempo, but that's not exactly what that genre is either. And it hit me like, okay, both of these are basically the genre I'm going to be trying to invent, this space house thing where it owes a lot to ambient, but it maintains a connection to dance music, but kind of chill down tempo type stuff, in line more with like deep house than say trance or techno or so on. And it's likely to get into like dissonant weird stuff, but not really in the same way that say Berlin techno does, because there's genres that are very good at getting strange and doing aggressive things. But I don't necessarily go for that. What I go for is, like space music, almost like when as Grateful Dead would do drum space and that kind of thing, where there's certain sort of largely psychedelic, old habits die hard. I may have given up using drugs a whole bunch of decades ago, but my musical tastes were formed by certain things, and music is free. I can do as much music as I want, so it's deeply colored by that. But the context is much more like space house music rather than calling it something like techno. It's never really going to go there. And if you've got like deep house, that's typically like one of my acquisitions. I'm hoping to run with this one. I need to make up a special cable network to connect this, rather than powering my weird little chord organs off of Turing machine things. Although I still have those that are going to be evolving semi-random kind of stuff, and lots of stuff gets controlled by that. But I picked up a qubit bloom, and qubit bloom is something where it'll settle on like a 4-node or an 8-node sequence. It has 2 channels, and it'll start throwing in these variations on that. And I started investigating it and going, well, I have no interest using this to make a melody or a set of melodies, but it would be perfect for running my chord progressions because it'll do a repeating sequence of chords, and then it'll start throwing variations on those chords and possibly modifying and involving them a lot, all within the context of something more cyclical. And the thing about something like deep house or composed music is it is meant to lead you to stuff. And the notion of space house is very different. And I think I can really do this. I am looking forward to giving it a try because it's finally getting into the zone of like what I do. Like I have a concept that defines what I do. Normal music, house music, chord progressions, deep house, other forms of stuff. It's meant to do a progression from somewhere to somewhere, and it's supposed to make sense, and you're supposed to get it. I was thinking the other day about how, like, if I'm trying to jam along with the music that I make, what is in it for me is the capacity for surprise. I want to be challenged by what the synthesizer, what its chord progressions, what its things are doing. I want to be able to throw weird stuff out there and sometimes coincidentally hit upon the same idea as the synthesizer is doing and make it sound like, wow, that was magic. How do you know to go there? But if I'm confused while playing along with it, the listener's going to be completely lost. And that's been killing my ability to communicate any of this stuff. And that's been a real drag. It's not been fun being part of the situation where it's like, I want to be appealing to people and people don't seem to like it because they're not communicating what it is. I'm putting like tags on it like deep house or techno or whatever. People come for that and they're like, this doesn't sound intentional. What's wrong with it? It's broken. Well, the thing with a concept of space house is like, okay, so house, so it's going to have a 4 on the floor beat typically. Distinguishing it from, say, drum and bass, where you specifically don't have a 4 on the floor beat and then you can do anything else. And should. But space music, it's not designed to take you on a little journey and bring you back to where you were. Space is about going out there, where you don't know what's going to happen. And maybe it's confusing, but you go along with it anyway. And it takes you somewhere, but it doesn't take you anywhere, and it doesn't bring you back. You just go farther and farther out. And that's what I've been doing with my music for years. I just need a way of defining it in such a way that I can communicate what I'm trying to do. Because if I can communicate what I'm trying to do, and I think this is relevant to anybody doing music, especially doing music for like that Spotify guy who was like, you need to do more music than just every couple of years. And a lot of musicians responded to him with like, well, screw you. People who composed good music and made albums and had something to say. And I sympathize with that enormously, and that's a lot of what I like to listen to. But the funny thing about it, although I am not and never will be on Spotify, I'm fascinated with the kind of thing like if you go to that Chilled Cow YouTube station where it's just crunchy lo-fi hip-hop forever, and it's just a whole series of little clips of music, but they're all basically the same. And none of it really matters very much, but it's just kind of there. It's like a cafe you can go to, but in sound. And that's the kind of stuff I really like, is the idea that I can show up for something and make a thing in sound that's consistent and that you know what it's going to be, and hopefully it'll be interesting and cool. And having done that, I can ironically be exactly the same. I think it's Daniel Ek. The same thing that Daniel Ek wants everybody to be like, but it's because I'm inventing a genre that is about, and I've even thought of things like doing, getting into doing this music again and doing it in such a way that when I finish the session, I sort of quietly power everything down and make sure that it remembers where it was at. And then when I resume, like the next week or whenever I start doing it again, it picks up where it left off and continues onwards. The idea is that there would be no preparation outside of what's actually happening in the flow of everything, but that there would be that continuity so that you could eventually piece it together into this one infinitely giant, ginormous musical journey that would just keep going. It would go through all these different places, but you'd be able to link the pieces of it together. And you could probably do, you can link almost anything together. DJs know that. All you got to do is like match whatever is happening or do some kind of interesting connection. But the idea of, at one point I wanted to set up a computer and like camera and something like that and set up one of those chilled cow-like stations, but with entirely modular synthesis doing this sort of deep house style music that would just go, so that you'd hear it going through whatever changes it would go through, typically running from the Turing machines and so on. And knowing that nobody was fiddling with it, it was just doing all of that stuff out of its own little head. And ideally in such a way where if you wanted to pick up an instrument and jam along with it, that would be coherent and make some kind of sense. So, yeah, this is where my head's at, typically because I am in the middle of redesigning that. I also got a tiny little mixer, 2 HP. I don't know if anybody is doing the modular stuff. 2 HP makes all these tiny little things. And they're really quite affordable, but they'd better be because they're almost nothing to them. And I picked up what they call their Unity, which is simply a mixer. It's got a couple of different settings. And it is a, if I'm not mistaken, DC coupled line mixer with no controls whatsoever. It's just 3-into-1, a double 3-into-1 mixer. And there's a switch which lets you either sum everything at full level. I'm not sure whether it involves like DC blocking, to what extent it handles that kind of stuff. But there's also a setting where you could take 3 things and pad them all enough that they would come up with a line level or modular level output. And I'm not really sure what else. I'll be finding out. But the thing about it is all it is some jacks, some little tiny resistors, and a surface mount TL074 op amp. Probably it would inevitably be a dual op amp because that's the thing, is it is a double submixer. So that's pretty much perfect for some of the stuff that I'm dealing with, like getting percussion stuff together and having that go into my mixing board in a way that I can have inputs for everything, because I'm running out of inputs. And since people aren't especially interested in that, at least until I start doing it, and maybe not even then, Chovid. I am not sure I have spoken about Bitcoin and crypto. There's a number of interesting things about that, and crypto has many meanings. By the way, there is a thing that went on. The folks that I had a falling out with, there's been an amusing twist, or sort of an amusing twist. I gotta laugh at it because what else am I gonna do? There's nothing to do about it other than laugh at it. I had a bit of a falling out with these folks because they were, like I said, pilled. They were a lot farther right than I am, and I'm a lot farther left, and we never really saw eye to eye in that way. And it got to a point where it's like, okay, I can't get along with this any longer. And one of those folks was what you might call a crypto, Nazi. And the idea is like, oh, I'm just joking. And he was using a image on a particular place that we both went sometimes. And he was using this image of a character that was a fictional character that was this villain and was very dark and miserable and unhappy. And that was kind of a drag because this was somebody who I spent time with, and I didn't like to think of him being super duper miserable. Not that he acted like that, but it's like that was how I was feeling at the time, and so that's my image. And he kept that for ages, all the time that he was being very polite with me. And then we had this falling out. So he didn't need to be polite with me. So he immediately changed the image over to a much more cheerful Nazi character. And I'm like, oh, alrighty, you do you. Hope you don't act on any of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I can't say as I'm terribly surprised. So that's one definition of what crypto can be. And it goes along with like the warnings I was seeing, like, oh, you need to be friends with us. Don't push because you might cause people to become more fascist. It's like, no, sometimes people just, that's what they wanted to do. That's where they wanted to go. And there's a certain, like, I mean, I know I feel somewhat relieved cutting ties like that, and in a very real way, I hope this other person is feeling relieved because it's not like it was making things any easier for either of us getting along. It's like, no, you go do you. I guess I must have been stifling you with you trying to stay dialed down a notch so that I wouldn't freak out. Might as well just go whole hog. Doesn't really make any difference in the long run. And then at least you can have a little more freedom of attitude or whatever. And I don't have to co-sign it because the whole point was like, I can't be around that stuff, guys. And it's like, yeah, alrighty, fine. But I did think it was kind of funny that immediately much more cheerful Nazi character. It's like, okay, hey, I dig on the cheerful part. I'm not down with this other part, but you knew that. And anyway, crypto, as it's being asked about, is a very different subject. It just came up because I knew that was one of the things, one of the meanings of it. One of the things about Bitcoin is it's rife for being wild, like, it's a real good way to get ripped off. It's a real good way for people who have money or resources to run cons on people. I've known people who thought that they would get really into some kind of cryptocurrency thing or whatever. When they were not wealthy people themselves, they were always screwed. It is not a real thing. And, well, it might be a real thing if you need to buy drugs or guns on the black market or something. Could be some of that. Might be a very effective way of dealing with stuff like that. But as far as being, a functional system, it's not that functional of a system because it's kind of like the stock market in that it's down to, like, what can you convince people to believe? And when you get right down to the bottom line, and that's all a thing is, you'd better have the power and influence to be able to get people to believe stuff. Otherwise, you're shut out. So being super into crypto, it is not a leveling technology. It is a technology for people who already have power, money, and influence to rip more punny, power, and influence. That's great. Out of the world. And it's like, well, I guess that's going to happen one way or another. But yeah, I would rate Bitcoin and crypto outside of the ability to buy black market stuff. I would rate it as on the same level as really complicated financial instruments being done by stock market and investing style people. In that it's possible to come up with really complicated stuff that basically means I take more of somebody's money and run away with it. And it's about being clever, but it's about being persuasive. And it's hard to see it in anything other than a very social dynamic. So, there is also a very distinct negative aspect of it. And it is this. The super negative aspect of crypto is that it is doomed to crash or literally cook the planet in excess waste heat done through computation serving no purpose whatsoever. And that's just super dumb. This is not something to do as, energy gets poured into the climate, causing it to become a more chaotic system and all hell to break loose in all kinds of places. It is not sensible to put an exponential amount of energy into meaningless calculation. Just to, you might as well have the I say it is coin and be like, this coin, granted, I have no way of legislating this or forcing anybody to go along with it, but this coin is worth more because I said it was. Which is basically your stock market. Crypto has this mask of being able to tie some kind of effort or expenditure to making more of this stuff, but the problem is it is wasted effort and increasingly expensive. And again, to do it in a significant way, you have to be able to come up with insane amounts of processing power, like taking the entire generations of GPUs and things off the market because somebody just had a bunch of money. It's always about somebody who had a bunch of money, buying it all up and putting it to work somewhere. And the other downside of that, besides just the literal fact of doing it, is doom. It's inevitably got to either fail or we just burn. And that's never going to happen. So it's going to fail at some point, and it's just who is left holding the bag. The other aspect of it is a profound reward for the nastiest and most exploitative behavior tied to literally getting money. Like, if you could, for instance, get some kind of small village and set them all on this big-ass treadmill and get them to walk on the treadmill until they die, and you hook that to a generator and you power computers and Bitcoin mine, that is way more profitable than anything else because you're basically just, enslaving people to do that. Or if you can find a place where, hydroelectric power or something like that is arbitraged in such a way that you can get it for cheaper than it should really be going for, or take it away from somebody in some kind of way, exploit things. The idea of arbitrage is you got to cheat, you got to exploit things. It's not really about playing things nicely or operating in any manner of any kind of social way. Basically, if you can exploit things and cheat, you win. And if you cannot or will not cheat, you lose. And it doesn't matter in what way you do this, only that you come up with a way of doing that. You got to come up with a loophole. You got to come up with something that's like, okay, I'm feeding ground dead babies into my power generator, and that makes it 2 cents cheaper. Therefore, I'm going to do that, and then you win, and you're getting more Bitcoin because you have come up with whatever way of doing it. The whole thing, you can hide servers in any kind of place, so it really makes it super duper easy. Any way that you can obliterate, any way that you can cheat, basically, any way that you can abuse society or people or access to energy, do crimes, anything. It is a conduit to being able to turn that literally into money, because all you got to do is come up with electricity somehow and feed it to whatever your computers are. And the link between electricity and the amount of Bitcoin that you're producing is very direct, and that can be very secretive. So the prospects for Bitcoin and crypto easily facilitating a lot of really negative stuff is considerably greater than if you had to, say, make factories or something like that, or sell things by retail. You're Amazon, so you make the super marketplace, and then the stuff you have to deal with is like counterfeit stuff, human rights abuses from your suppliers, things like that. And those can hold you accountable. But if you're only powering servers with electricity and they can be anywhere and it's really decentralized, that is the open invitation to do literally anything that you can, because all you got to do is be able to produce power somehow. And what you get out of it is it's like evil and wickedness laundering. Like, no matter what you do to power those computers, nobody will ever know what you did. So, honestly, as far as Bitcoin and crypto is concerned, I think it's interesting, but I also think that there's a lot that inevitably, that must go terribly wrong with it. So, I guess you would say not a fan. Let me skip ahead, because we've got now more people. And if you didn't see, if you just dialed in, I do have my list of the plugins that I've just released as newly available old school audio units, the ones that I made back in the day. So let's see, TL074 is indeed a quad op amp. Joe, hey, thank you. And all yay for fixing the air conditioner. If I had an air conditioner in this room, I could probably run more lights and stuff, but summer won't last forever. EB, a monitor most definitely can cause buzz in your Telecaster. Maybe not as much as a cathode ray tube. Old school CRT monitors might cause even more buzz. So can a fluorescent light. Any number of things will cause buzz in your Telecaster, because your Telecaster, much like mine, which is sitting up there, I'm not sure if you can see, I now have tambourines hanging there. I had them already, I just stuck them there most recently. Those are single coil pickups. If it is a normal Telecaster and has the kinds of pickups that sound like a Telecaster, then they're not really they're not even balanced to the extent of being truly hum canceling. They're probably going to be different. The neck pickup is not going to be the exact same impedance as the bridge pickup. And using either one of them by itself is going to be literally the single coil sound. And any outside interference is going to cause buzz in that. So one thing that helps with that, if you are dealing with a buzzy Telecaster or single coil pickup guitar, is if you're recording and you have a need for it to be quiet, there's probably a position, an orientation in the room that will be least noisy and most noisy. So what you wind up doing is rotating, listening to where the buzz is, tilting it up and down, and seeing if you can find an orientation where you can still play it, but where it's not buzzing so much because it's localized. And if I'm not mistaken, the way that works is it's kind of like this spool. This is a wire spool that I'm using for making the little connections. Like, here's one of those little connections I told you about. I don't have a use for this one anymore, but I had at one point. It was plugged into a series of chord organs and connected the chord or root thing together. And it's just wiring these guys together. And I've got this wire, which is what I'm using for that. And it's like a guitar pickup. If you had a magnet through here, this would be a pickup. It would be very low impedance because it's a really heavy wire and there's not that many turns compared to a pickup. But it would be a coil with a magnet inside it and a pull piece, and it would pick up a string over the top of it vibrating. And it's also going to pick up electromagnetic waves coming off of, say, the screen or a light. And I think the way that works is if it is, because the thing about it is that the interference has to be able to cause a motion in the coil of wire, electrical motion in the coil of wire. And I think maybe the way the orientation works is that if you're literally facing the thing that's causing the buzz, it's either going to be, if you're facing the thing that's causing the buzz, then it's affecting all the coils in exactly the same way. Or if it's side on to what's causing the buzz, it's not affecting the... I'm not exactly sure, but what I do know is that if you have your pickup, you're holding your guitar, and there's a buzz coming from a monitor or the fluorescent light, something like that, you rotate your instrument, you rotate the pickup, and there's going to be places where it buzzes worst, and there's going to be places where the buzz cancels out, and it's a very narrow little... You got to aim it exactly right, but when you do it, it really kind of minimizes that particular interference. Now, if you have two separate things in the same environment, you can't possibly orient it to both. But if you have one primary source of buzz, it's possible to fool with it in such a way that it'll minimize that a little bit. Bo has a question. What's next on the plugin horizon? And I would say one of the things that is next, now that I have the DMG files posted, and all those old ones, like all the variations on 80 clip except for 80 clip 5, which I didn't have, and including 3D clip, and all of that are now up. Bus colors 2, bus colors 3, character, everything is there. Now that I've got that done, I can write up the Airwindows website post of the stuff we were doing looking into tempo. And that'll be another one more thing as far as posting a plugin and then going, also this also is happening here. And it'll probably be in the form of some kind of downloadable image or text file. Something that you could print out, something that is a usable reference to have around. Like somebody mentioned, Mixed by Pritcha mentioned 115 BPM as Deep House, I think. And the thing about that is I wouldn't necessarily be using that. Like the chart that I have over here, the serene and stable tempo would be better suited to be 113, or indeed I could go to 98. I've heard people saying, oh yeah, we'll start at 100 BPM, and that's pretty close to 98. So a nice sort of chilled tempo might be one of those, but I could also do stuff like continuing to work around the different like stable versus unstable tempos. I could go to 105 for very slow but feeling as if there was a lot of drama in it. And that's something also that I need to finish up, write up, and post and be all set. Same deal with the lyric dictionary that I was coming up with, that I've made some progress on. I've been working on this fairly steadily as well. Sometimes there's so many things being worked on steadily that it's kind of mind-boggling. But I'll gradually get through to these things. Bit by bit, I've been getting one thing after another taken care of. And EB, to follow up with that, it's not necessarily that the LCD monitor will cause electrointerference. If you have a power cable going into the LCD monitor, it might very well have some kind of transformer. It might very well have some kind of power supply that is causing the buzz because the power supply is causing electromagnetic waves as it grabs power from the wall and plugs it into some capacitors to smooth it out and give it to the screen. So the monitor itself may not be causing, in the same sense that that a CRT monitor would be modulating an electron beam involving 60 cycles per second of a particular thing dealing with the scan line. Those were very good at causing buzz. But the LCD monitor could be causing buzz through its power supply. That there would be a lot of energy going through something that was capable of making electromagnetic interference. And it's, say, the crude power supply that is feeding the stuff that's making all the little pixels turn on and off, right? And there are ways of working around this. For instance, if the monitor ran a toroidal transformer in whatever part of its power supply was being used, then toroidal transformers do not send out or pick up interference in the same way. So, but then those are also more expensive, and you're not likely to find that in many monitors for that reason, because people will figure like there is no purpose to it. Another thing is that you can do, say, like switching power supplies, things like that. But the bottom line is, if the energy coming into the system is being sent into some kind of storage thing like a capacitor for powering everything, and the path of the electricity through wires is enough to cause like sharp fluctuations that have inductance and can send electromagnetic waves around, then like maybe sometimes not having a large transformer that could make a deep 60 cycle hum, you maybe don't have a large transformer, but the way that it's handling the electricity coming in is causing sharp switching artifacts. So rather than having a powerful hum coming into your guitar, you'd be having a sharp buzz coming into your guitar, because the audio equivalent of, you're basically overhearing electromagnetic content. And there's actually stuff like, there are synthesizers and things designed. I think the guy that does the Lyra 8, Soma Laboratories, has a device that's essentially a very high-powered amplifier on just a coil. And the whole point of this device is to pick up broad-band electromagnetic interference anywhere it can find it, just to make ugly noises. Like, there's very little... you'd have to be near the right kinds of things. And this Soma Technologies thing, if your guitar hums when it's near your monitor, you could take this Soma Technologies thing and it would be a really wild, sharp, intense buzz that you could move around the surface of the monitor and hear all this other craziness going on. And all of that you would also be able to hear by moving your guitar pickup in the same positions, just quieter. Whereas the Soma thing is designed to amplify it hugely and make it super duper loud. So Yeah, I hope, EB, that I underscored that absolutely LCD monitors can cause electromagnetic interference. Anything happening inside the circuit is capable of doing that. Like, you could have my mixing board and compressor are all using power supplies that are on the ends of long cables. They have these crazy sort of wall wart things where there's a long cable that plugs into the mixer, and then on the end of the cable is the power supply, and the power supply has an easy power, just a power cord. Basically, you plug that into the power supply and run that to the wall. And that is specifically because even a simple power supply for something like your compressor or something like your reverb unit or something like that, even the power supply that's built into the unit itself is going to be causing some electromagnetic interference, and it can be enough to cause problems, especially when the piece of gear you're talking about, like my mixer or whatever, uses transformers inside its own design to couple stages to other stages. So that's why they make a big point of getting even the normal power supply far away from the audio circuitry. Same deal, same problem as with your Telecaster and the LCD monitor. It's like they just want to get the interference farther away. As far as a Furman power unit, I'm not sure that would be the case. There's a number of things that you can do. For instance, here, put my coffee over. Actually, this is a better idea. Move a bottle of water over. Here's a coil again. This is my spool of wire. You can take your power cable and run the wires of the power cable through a couple of these, maybe with like an iron core or something like that. If it is two windings, that is a transformer. If it's only one winding, that's called a choke. And these are also found in guitar amplifiers as well. And I can't speak for Furman power units specifically. Some things like that are about being surge protectors. Some things like that are simply about having more outlets in your power strip. But it's also possible to do a external device where inside the device it's putting a high value choke in series with the power cable. And what that's going to do, let's say, you've got your amplifier over here, right? And then in the other room, and you might have even experienced this, like you may have experienced this happening. You're in this room listening to music or playing a guitar, and your amp is plugged into the wall, and over in the other room is somebody with a power saw or something like that. And what they do is they fire up their power saws, and at the same time you're hearing through your guitar amp, and there is a interference noise. That is not necessarily all about the power saw in the other room causing a electromagnetic force that is so powerful that it's reaching all the way into the other room. It can be just a matter of, here, I'll use this to demonstrate it. Let us say that this is the inside of the motor of the power saw. And it's got a shaft that is rotating, and then there are little contacts that connect to these places. And as a contact switches from one of these to another of these, it changes the orientation of the coils inside the motor, or it changes how they're wired up, and helps it turn by rapidly inverting the polarity of the coils, causing them to be pulled to the negative magnet and then the positive magnet in turn. And every time the commutator, the thing that connects to the coils, moves across these contacts and disconnects from one and then connects to the other, you have a situation where the motor is pulling like 2 amps. It's pulling a lot of power because it's a power saw. And then it's disconnected. And then it's reconnected, but in reverse. And then it's disconnected again. And since the power saw is going really fast, what you're getting is this modulation of the power draw from the saw, but it's flickering at audio frequencies. And that's what you hear coming through your pickup. It's not so much that it's making a powerful magnetic field coming from the other room. It's that it is draining the power supply of the house, like of the wall, in this flickering way where there is a buzz going through the entire house, going through the entire system, because of that extremely heavy power draw that is switching off and on at very rapid rates. And it can, sometimes you run a power saw or something like that, and you see inside the thing, it's sparking away like crazy because it's drawing so much energy. And that sparking is visible interference going into the wall, going into the power supply. And one way to stop it is if you did have a coil of wire between the wall and the power cable and your amplifier, that would tend to not let through this flickering energy from the power supply. It would smooth that out. So again, I can't speak for a Furman power unit as necessarily being able to, like, I'd have to look inside it, and then I would have a better idea as to whether it has chokes, whether it has smoothing. You can have capacitors across the wires of the power supply, and as long as they are not so large that they're trying to take 60 cycles and smooth that out, they will try to smooth out more rapid modulations of the voltage. And any of these things can somewhat minimize the amount of interference that you're going to get out of the wall current. So when you're talking about a Furman, you're talking about like a power conditioner. So typically a power conditioner is going to specifically try to do things like when you've got the power saw in the other room and it's turning, and as a result of the commutator and the electric draw on it, it is sending this fluctuating current right back into the house, and all of the things on the same circuit with it, now they're not only just getting 60 hertz as alternating current power, they're also getting this weird, loud, noisy stuff from the voltage drain that is so irregular. The power conditioner, if it's good at being a power conditioner, would be able to suppress that. And it'll also drain the power a little bit just because it's less efficient than taking literally all the power that is given to you. Like you run through a choke, it's going to generate some heat, it's going to reduce the amount of energy that you can pass through it. But that said, power conditioning is something that can work. Let me have a look at how the chat is going on. I don't know much about programming MIDI and Reaper with the mouse and keyboard myself. I do know that people typically like Logic for that, and I learned Logic when I was starting to use DAWs, and so that's what comes most natural to me. I love the coffee drinking. We are only an hour in, so another 40 minutes or so, another 45 minutes or so. So yeah, one thing I could probably talk about a little bit is this amazing, crazy list of all this stuff. Seeing as I have the giant list of things, this gives me the opportunity to quite easily answer questions about these plugins, seeing as we have so many of them now. So yeah, stop me if you've heard these before. I actually read them all through. I am wondering if anybody has thoughts on stuff they would like to hear about this list of plugins, seeing as you can now download them. I think everything I've got here is not some kind of mistake. I wonder whether some of these, maybe just one or two of them, I got mixed up and they're actually not there. I know I have a couple of instances of like the extra bass plugins and such. Like there is a version of Righteous with extra bass. There is a version of To Vinyl 2 that had extra bass. So people like that kind of thing. You're able to pick up some of the weirder earlier ones that did not make it into the VST version. So Bo, I don't know how my brother is. When he spoke to my other brother, who was trying to arrange us getting together in a socially distanced way in his backyard, that brother was like, well, that's nice, but I will never wear a mask. And that was all we had to say with him. That was his hill to die on. I don't know whether he's died on it. I hope not. But it's one of those things. This is the same guy that left the family for 10 years. So in a way, it's like, well, that apparently set the tone. So if we only get to catch back up with him 10 years from now, then it's not like we're the first to carry on that way. As far as newer old projects in the plans, well, that would depend. It's like some of the challenges that I have with these brothers come from just upbringing kind of stuff. Like essentially we are all hey Andy, we are all a kind of abuse survivor, as were both of our parents. Each step of the way, whoever was on the hot seat as well kind of did better than the cards they were dealt. Like I didn't really know my grandfathers very much. I had a grandfather who was a vice president at Chevrolet, which is very interesting. I actually have the Chevrolet desk lamp that he was awarded for some kind of thing. And I even have a fancy pants clock that the grandfather was given from somebody in Sweden or whatever, where he went to do a Chevrolet thing. And that clock ran for years of my childhood and then broke and was never fixed, because the family that I grew up in, kind of nothing was ever fixed. And my grandfather had a brother, Teddy. And Uncle Teddy was not my uncle. He was known as Uncle Teddy because he was my dad's uncle. Was a terrifying, rage-filled man who nearly beat my aunt to death once in my dad's presence. And my dad survived. And so did the aunt. They survived this stuff, and they did not repeat it exactly. they dialed it way back. Unfortunately, that still left a lot of room for misbehavior, and me and my siblings survived that, and we in turn dialed things way back. For me, that still left room for misbehavior even so, and I've grown up over the years to make further improvements on the lot that I got dealt. But this has something to do with why my relationship with family is pretty limited. And I don't think I am unique in this respect. There's a lot of people out there who are doing their best that they can with what they've got. But it does mean that as far as projects are concerned, I think if we're talking about projects with my brothers, we've tried that in the past, and I can't say as it's ever worked. Bits of it have worked at times. My particular relationship around that has tended to be not healthy for me in the sense of I have to kind of do a role that's expected of me, and I fall into it very easily, but it's not good for me to act that way. And I spent a lot of time fawning and reassuring these brothers that they're wonderful and brilliant and great, and there's no room for me to be anything good. So I kind of, that's part of what drives Airwindows, is that there is the need to do stuff that's important and worthwhile, and I did not get that out of growing up. There was no place for me there, so I've had to make my own. But yeah, projects makes me think of some of the stuff that I could conceivably have been doing with my brother that I doubt is going to be a thing. I really couldn't begin to tell you which of them would be easier to get in sync with and finally be able to do that with, because the one guy is a lot more stable and level-headed and stuff, and yet also very set in his ways, and the other guy is, well, the one who's like, I will never wear a mask, and all that kind of stuff that just doesn't fly anymore, and also has more of a capacity to listen in certain ways. He'll listen, he's just really determined about certain things that aren't working for us at the moment. So it's anybody's guess. But projects, we always kind of tried to make games. And I don't really play games, so that's a weird thing, but it interests me at the same time because it's a concept that, you make games or toys or devices or something like that. In a sense, my synthesizer is a game because I am trying to invent forms of music where it kind of thinks on its own and does stuff. And by that same token, there are things that we have not done that I've been interested in. Like one of the things that I did way back was the video game counterpart. And that's out there. Like you can download it. I can't guarantee that it'll work, but you can download it off of the Airwindows website. And there are neat things about it and there are lame things about it. It is a interesting enough concept, although I'm not sure how compelling it is. And it's implemented in such a way that it is the most unstreamable and uncompressible, unfilmable images ever that you could possibly ever have. Everything about it is just made to be garbage on YouTube. It's almost impossible to make anything worse in that way because it's using persistence of vision to do some visual effects, and you can't do that. That is not compressible into YouTube form. So anytime I've ever tried to demonstrate it, like 95% of what it has going for it is lost. So yeah, but that was a kind of project. And me and the corporate coder brother technically they're both corporate coder brothers, but one of them is a web programmer and one of them is like hardcore accounting database, down to the metal management. But we repeatedly tried to make games that were basically like this game that exists and is already defined, except for, and then didn't really get very far as the except for. The most recent one was something like Galaxian, except for that your shots made holes in a scrolling piece of paper, and then you needed to not fall into the holes. And I fooled around with a number of ideas as far as the mechanics of how that would be done, and what would make it more difficult to go through, and what would actually be fun to deal with, and didn't really come up with any conclusive answers. It was just a case where we had gotten to the point of actually trying to bring each of our strong points together, rather than just like, okay, this is all about Dan's strong points and my complete weakness in the context of what we were doing. Or this is all about my strong points and Dan has no idea what I'm doing and never does really figure it out. It's like we were beginning to try to deal with some of that, but it was like pulling teeth. It was really tough. And I'm sure it wasn't just only tough with me. So further projects, I guess that would depend. Like, I think I was asked earlier that, what's the next plugin idea? And, among the next things coming along, I need to get into this slew clipping thing. I'm going to need to do some more experimenting where, rather than just slew clipping in the sense of go from here to here, and if it goes too far, you only go as far as this, I need to also do it in the way that the acceleration plugin, and also DS, come to think of it, does it, where you are tracking reversals of the signal and slew clipping those harder. And the thing about that is, if that works, that will lead to a new version of channel, because channel can now use what's in capacitor 2, and meaning that I can do a version of channel that will use that on its high pass, which is very, very simple and basic. It's also possible that there could be things like density and drive, which have high passes built into them. And yeah, like Andy is bringing up. Andy, you're so eager to have me doing guitar related stuff. Well, the things that I'm working on now are steps in that direction. These are steps in the direction of being able to do a guitar related plug that's like half decent. And as such, it seems valuable. Oh, Andy, you should be checking out Pocket Verbs. It does have a spring reverb sound built into it. I would say fool with that. But yeah, outside that kind of thing, I did have an idea regarding it's another one of those video game ideas. Like, Counterpart is the idea of, can you have a game where you're moving around in a 3D space, looking at all of these other entities like you, and communicating with them by firing these like white sparkly zaps in order to have them communicate some information back to you in purely contextual, like physical stuff. Basically, rather than having them, because the purpose is you're seeking something and they can't answer you in language, and you're seeking one that resembles what you look like, but you can't see yourself. So what you're basically doing, and this did not fulfill its promise, I feel. But, hello, solo tapes. What it ended up becoming was you're zipping around in this bizarre environment, firing these electrical zaps at other balls with bright colors on them. And if they had seen whatever you're looking for, they would fire an electrical zap in the direction where they last saw what you were looking for, which isn't the same as firing it in the direction that you need. Instead, you had to sort of reason it out and be like, okay, well, you came from over there, so you last saw the thing over there, but it might have moved from there to here, so it could be anywhere around here, and I'm now asking this other one, oh, that's looking from over there. That's the opposite direction, so whatever I'm looking for, it must be really booting around and moving a lot. And of course, if it's in sight, then they would both see it and be like, oh, it's right there. But the sophistication of that, I don't think was really communicated. And it became just like zipping around and firing zaps, and either they were accurate and pointing towards the thing that you sought, or they were not accurate in some way. But the neat part of it is that there was an element of communication and an element of deception, or sort of logic about it, that was being expressed in completely nonverbal terms. Like, if you were asking people and they pointed in the direction of what you were looking for, but you'd ask people and they would just point like, oh, I saw the thing down that street, and they pointed in some direction. That's not necessarily the same thing as being directed to whatever it is, but it's to whatever it is as far as they knew. And again, that is counterpart. That is an old project. So as far as newer projects are concerned, I have had an idea that I'd like to experiment with. And that could happen, like in my copious free time. I have some plugins to make first, as always. I would like to get my music thing going again, as always. But this idea is the idea where I bounced it off of my brother, and he was like, that's ridiculously overblown and you can never possibly do it. So I'm like, cool, I'll do it this weekend. You know, I can't avoid rising to a challenge like that. It is as follows. Supposing, and I can use my paper and pen for this, I think. Supposing you have like these bases, and there's walls and stuff, and you're trying to get some kind of guy over to shoot the opposing base. So you have little tanks that can move around. And the reason they can move around is there's electricity coming from the base to the little tank. But if the little tank moves too far, it's no longer connected to the base. The electricity can't reach that far, so it stops. You go beyond the range and it can no longer move. But you can make a chain through these different things and move each guy as long as they're powered. So if you were on the opposing side, you've got these guys moving around. And they're trying to get a shot on your base or whatever. So if you were on the opposing side, you're going to want to make some kind of chain where you're going somewhere and you're able to attack a link in the chain of your enemy, meaning that this guy and let's see, meaning that this guy is no longer connected because you've blown up one of these tanks. It probably respawns back at the base, but the connection only goes this far now. This one is now cut off because one of the links in the chain went away. So that's the idea of the functionality of that one. I was going to call it Tankies, and I never told my brother that, yeah, Tankies is actually a reference to a certain kind of hard leftist that wants to just obliterate all of its enemies, you know, send in the tanks. And but it's a cute sounding name, so it will be a cute sounding name for a game. Here's the thing. It should be possible to make a description for how this kind of stuff works, where you'd be able to use like a genetic algorithm or whatever to have the opponent be AI. That, or write a language where these things can be managed, and you'd be programming the AI to drive their little tanks and stuff. And the idea would be you could pit your AI against somebody else's AI and see who won or whatever. Or you could maybe go and fight somebody else, and they would be able to drive their personal tanks around and go up against you, but they could also have their version of the AI, and you'd go up against their version of the AI and see whether you could beat it. There could be a lot of variation in ways of doing this. It would all depend upon like what kind of terrain you're on, what kind of 3D or 2D or whatever is implemented with, and it becomes a combination of like action game or something and strategic or tactical idea. So that is one possible project. It is a project that I never got started on, and yet it's there floating around. It may end up becoming something at some point. If it does, it's probably going to be done in Godot, the Godot engine, because much like how Blender is very neat. In fact, I have picked up something. I think I showed you guys or I showed somebody else. I have, hopefully this doesn't screw anything up, a little bitty Wacom tablet. And that is because I'm trying to learn some arty type stuff in 3D modeling, and you can now get a little bitty Wacom tablet for, or Wacom is how they call it, for really quite cheaply. I think that's like $80 worth, and it seems convenient. You can even get them in Bluetooth, and it's a useful tool with Blender for being able to take a simple stylus. This is a Wacom pen. It has 2 buttons here and the pressure sensitive tip, but this is the cheapie, so it doesn't have an eraser. But I am not a visual artist, so I don't have the chops to use an eraser effectively anyway. And doing 3D modeling in Blender would probably also feed what I would be doing in the Godot engine for making a 3D game using this concept of the little tankies running around, and you're sort of chaining electrical energy to get the one taking point to some useful purpose, and trying to figure out how to protect your own chain of connections. Because if you broke this connection and then sent the other guy out, they would be able to connect to whatever was within range. So if they got within the range of these, this one would engage again. You don't have to start it over. But by the same token, if this one blew up this tank and it goes back to nothing, this one is now dead, that would be sitting there silent and doing nothing, unless one of these guys shot it, in which case it would go back to base as well. But maybe they don't want to do that. So there becomes this sort of chess-like thing where you'd have this sitting there. It would be powerless and dead. Can't do anything, can't move, can't fire. If you shoot it, it goes back to base and becomes active again. If you just leave it there, it's not able to do anything. But if one of yours comes into range, it has electricity, and it gets within the range, suddenly that one is now engaged again. If you forgot it was there, maybe you're in big trouble. So I feel as if there is a lot of potential to that, and that there might be some non-intuitive stuff having to do with rating AIs to move these things around and do whatever it is that they need to do. Because of things like that, because of, you can have situations set up where it's like, okay, whole bunch of things, we have these inactivated, so there's very little that you can do. You only have a couple of moving game pieces, but you do stuff just right, and all of a sudden everything comes into play again. Yeah, it would be neat in VR. I don't think I have a way of doing VR at this time. Like, my computer could handle it currently. I've gotten to the point where I have a computer that could handle it. But I am not sure. Like, put it this way. I'm inclined to use the Godot engine for a number of reasons. One, it's free and open source. And two, it is a lot simpler than, say, Unity. And in some ways more accessible than like Unreal. Those being the main ones for your 3D game type stuff. You've got Unreal being very slick, but kind of designed for AAA. It's a heavy burden to learn how to use the Unreal engine. Granted, there are things about it that are simple and basic, but that's just a big stack of stuff. That's a very complicated scenario. And yes, you can do a lot of it with blueprints. Blueprints being like a sort of node-based system. But again, that's just a very heavy system that makes very big, complicated things. Unity can be simpler, but it's also buggy. Unity is apparently pretty hard to keep working. It is messy. And it's all full of all kinds like monetization strategies and spying on customers and game players and stuff. It's all of this really messy stuff, designed for mobile, designed for any number of things. And although that is what I used for Counterpart was coded in Unity. And although I liked some of the stuff that I was doing, it was kind of too big of a mess, and I would rather build the Godot engine infrastructure up rather than dive into one of these other main... It's like the Godot engine is comparable to, say, Blender in 3D. And that, especially going a few versions back, not all that impressive. Like, you try older versions of Blender, like what, 2.7? 1.7, 2.7? I forget. A 0.7 release versus the 0.8 release that was a major UI overhaul. And there was a time that it was just completely unwieldy and unmanageable. And then they did some major work on improving it. And there's a lot to... I have actually been buying tutorials from a company called Flip Normals. These guys on YouTube. The last 6 videos or whatever they've made are basically advertisements. They are doing nothing but talking about this is tutorials that I have on our marketplace. And here's tutorials. Here's the top 5 tutorials for doing these particular things that we have on our marketplace. So their videos are not necessarily all that thrilling. They seem nice enough, but they're clearly just marketing the stuff that they're personally selling. But the stuff that they're personally selling seems to be pretty slick. So I'm hoping to learn a little bit more about Blender using their information. And having done that, I can dive into implementing some of this stuff in Godot. And again, these systems started out like the free open source variation of the stuff, and very primitive, very cumbersome, non-intuitive, just not fun to deal with. But they're gradually getting better, and they're available to us all. And that means a huge amount to me. I care a lot about that stuff. So just as I am making my plugins available to us all, my big old list of stuff, which I never actually ended up getting into, but nobody had any specific questions about any specific plugins in here, which is fine, because just about everything here has also been released in a current VST enabled version. So this is just filling in the background. And I do have hopes that there are people who are like, I want to find the flavor of iron oxide that is for me, and we'll go and download all of the AUs of iron oxide or 2tape or 80 clip or whatever, and then be like, 80 clip 2 is the one that I love best. Like, cool. That's why I made those things available. I don't think that's necessarily going to hold for everybody, but I'd like people to be able to find their own kind of secret weapons out of that stuff. And by the same token, things like Blender, things like the Godot engine. And I am on the Godot engine's Patreon, by the way. I'm supporting them with like $1. Because I make minimum wage off of my own Patreon, so it's like, yeah. But I am supporting them. I don't think Blender has a Patreon. If they did, I'd throw $1 to them too. And I'd like to see those things expand and develop. So that's the angle I would be taking. There's also some additional things. Like, we're talking about projects. I should tell you about one of the music-related ones. I don't have this together yet. But, let me see, do I have any of my notes or tools around here? Yes, I do. You've seen this stuff before. How I've got my chord chart here, where each of the things on this chart is a mode that you can start at any of these chords. The chords within it are all belonging to the mode, whether they be minor, sevenths, whatever is characteristic of that particular mode. And then if you go to the side, that's a step of a fifth, meaning that only one note changes between this scale and this scale. And I've also got this little slide rule, which is just my way of looking at some of these things. Like if you start on C, this is just all the black keys. The Roman letters are the notes in the scale. This other thing is the mode, whether it be the Ionian mode, or say if we picked, I'll rotate it to where C is the Aeolian mode. That will now show me which of these notes it needs to be. And then I've got another on the side, which is minors. It's what step of the scale a given note represents. So you'd say B on C. And then if you went to a suspended fourth, that is also apparently an 11th, and that is a F in this. So I've been fooling around with my little cardboard in here. And one of my ambitions that I have not been able to get very far with yet, but which is not to say that it can't happen someday if I click with it, if I get the idea, figure out how to do it. I should be able to make something where it's a program probably done in the Godot engine, because the Godot engine can make applications of all kinds and let you distribute them, including distributing them for PC and Linux and so on. I should be able to make a thing where you start out with a melody, and for each note of the melody, it's like, which chords can sit with this note? Which chords can sit with this note and this bass line? If we have this bass note and this melody note, what chords go with that? If we change it around, what happens? Like if you take a melody note and then go like, where can we go if the melody note goes up a half step, even though that is not within this mode? What chords would fit with that? Like, what's the least amount of change you could do to add only that half step? What mode would that put things in? And it should be possible to write that as a computer program. I just haven't got there yet. I haven't really visualized how we would go about it. But the thing is, if I can do that, that gives you a compositional tool where you can start with just a couple of notes. Like you'd have maybe a bass line and a melody note. And then you take your melody note and or bass line and do whatever you want with it, and it starts spitting out what chords would modulate between the various things. So that's pretty exciting for me. That's the continuation of this concept of having stuff relating to modes and being able to define which modes mean what chords are in them, and what inversions of chords are in them. Like you don't just randomly pick a seventh chord. If you're in a particular mode, or if you're playing particular chords that go along to something, like if you are in C, this is Ionian mode in C, then there is the Mixolydian mode means you can go to G, but in the C scale you can also go to G seventh quite easily. And you can go to E minor seventh quite easily. And if you go from C in the major C scale, you're not going to go to E major necessarily, but if you did, where's the nearest D major? I'm looking this up on the chart. Here's a way to get to an E major. You'd go 1, 2, 3 over here, and then you're playing an E major seventh, and that fits in this mode, meaning that your C is now maybe a D, and the same area that allows for the E major seventh also calls for an A chord rather than the A minor that's part of your C scale, and a D chord rather than the D minor that is part of your C scale. And let me see, do any of these share? I would imagine that they would. Like A minor to A. Yeah. So one thing that this has in common, if you go from the C major and then throw in an E seventh, a chord that those two have in common is B minor. So I feel like you should be able to write a program to experiment with this stuff. There should be a program where you can experiment with this stuff and type in melodic sequences and be given choices for, like, here are some chords you can throw across this. Here are the chords that this has in common. And that would give you ways of modulating around and doing various things. So that's another project, but that's floating around in the atmosphere of the things that could possibly happen. But the nice thing about it is rather than the video game idea, that one is a musical one, and it's similar to the stuff I'm doing with tempos or the stuff I'm doing with lyrics. I'm still pursuing that make a rhyming dictionary out of the Upgoer 5 list of words. Because, again, I've mentioned this before, XKCD put out the Upgoer 5 book, which is explaining all kinds of scientific concepts using the 1,000 most common words in the English language. So that's already a thing. And you could already write lyrics in the Upgoer 5 text editor, because there is a website that is the Upgoer 5 text editor. And you can only type in the words in that dictionary. If you type in the word that is not in that dictionary, it goes, nope, that's not in the dictionary. Maybe you should try to rephrase this. But it's not a rhyming dictionary, and I think it should be a rhyming dictionary. So I'm working on that one as well. But yeah, there's a number of possibilities. The nice thing about the tempo list and the nice thing about the rhyming dictionary is that these don't have to be programs or software. They're basically just data, they're information. And if I can make them happen, I can put them out as just straight up data. And there'll be a post on the Airwindows website. It'll get out there, and if anybody can use it, they'll run with it. You can print it out. Print out the rhyming dictionary and look it up when you're trying to write lyrics. Or print out the tempo list and stick it up on the wall where you're doing music, and then when you need to accelerate from 120 beats per minute, you go, okay, I want things to feel more smooth and serene, so I have to ramp it all the way up to 130 to get it to another position of stability. Or if I want it to feel maximally, punchy and unstable, then 121 gets me to that sort of bumpy, high-intensity, non-smooth kind of genre. Or if I want to go for swagger, I would accelerate to, let's see, what does it say? 125 is where I would go from 120 if I was trying to get into a maximum swagger zone where it's not perfectly smooth, it's just slowed down enough to put some attitude in there. Or if I was trying to get into a groove type zone, I might fall back to 117 beats per minute. These are data. I don't have to do programs or stuff that'll run on particular computers in order to do that. So I like those. Let me see now. It's 12:38, so I'm getting on towards winding up for the day. So let me have a look at chat. I've been chatting away because I was asked about what projects I had going on, and oh boy, yeah, dangerous question to ask me. Things might be a little insane that way, but yeah, Holt update. If I could come up with a update for Holt, it would be a natural thing to include the gain thing, so maybe there might be. Probably what I should do is find out whether I can include the phenomenon I was using in capacitor 2 in Holt. If I was able to integrate that in some way, it would be a perfect opportunity to throw in the gain control on there as well, and just the whole thing would be more complicated. So you write that down. That might lead somewhere. I might be able to get more out of Holt by not just only adding a gain control, but also manipulating it in that way. So I will see. Easy, silly joke. Yeah, I'm looking forward to putting out those tempo ideas there, because that's more or less done. It's like I have the tempo thing to do, and I had to post this many plugins as far as the DMG is concerned. And now I've successfully done these. These are now on the website. Now I can refocus and do some of these other things. But this came first, quite literally, because now it's done. I don't have to do this again. This has been hanging out there forever because there's been all kinds of other stuff I was also doing. And this was waiting to get done. I knew that I needed to get this done. And it's just the pile of stuff to do. So, Lorenzo Bo Heresy I did not hear what a diode bridge sounds like. I did not hear what you were talking about. I missed it somehow. I think it was something was in a post or a comment, but I don't remember seeing a link. But I know I asked you, like, I'm not doing things on the base. Well, usually I'm not doing things on the basis of what a hardware unit would do. Like, there are exceptions. For instance, here's a diode thing that exists in some compressors. I have incorporated that. This is two diodes coming off of a either single or full wave rectifier on each channel, left and right. And if you take this and you have each channel being turned into a voltage, and then you run the voltages through diodes, I think I've got this going the right direction, the indication of the diode, to here, then you will get the output for managing the gain of both channels from whichever is going to be the louder of either channel. They will combine. And that is a thing that's done in diodes, and that exists in some of my plugins because it exists in some circuitry, but it's also like a conceptual diagram. Oh, Bo, you were into that as well. Okay, so now I see several people interested in what's going on there. I never got I think what I was looking for was, yeah, sure, I will grab the link and I will throw it on my desktop and go in and investigate it. I never got a description. It's like, oh, so this is interesting. This is different from what I'm already doing. How? What does it do? And I never got a description in adjectives. It's almost like your Tom Waits thing where it's like, I want it to sound more purple. Like, I needed that kind of explanation to really have something to connect to, because otherwise it's like, why do I care? Why do I care that it's diode? Why do I care that it's diode bridge? So I was looking for that, looking for the explanation of diode bridge and like, what does it do sonically? And I can certainly go and check it out. Give me. Actually, come to think of it, I bet you can't give me the link. I'm going to have to look it up in the YouTube post that you made, because I'm pretty sure I can find it if I go and look. But I have a feeling, even though I'm looking at the output of live chat, I bet it's not letting you post the link. YouTube got a YouTube. You know, one of the things that's happened recently is a guy was complaining, going like, did you know that they're starting to throw all of these, oh, well, I've already, like, Logical is already acting like a SSL bus compressor. If there is something functional about it that this misses, maybe that's likely to lead to a new incarnation of Logical. So basically, it's like, how can I... Fair enough. I assume that you've linked to the video. I will go and check that out, even if you can't post it here. But yeah, somebody was saying, like, did you know that YouTube is now throwing lots of mid-roll ads in? They've defaulted stuff. And my answer to them was, I run uBlock. So I assumed that people are able to run blockers, and that's the only way I can cope with the internet. So I will tend to assume that people need to be doing that as well. And as far as running ads on the streams, I have no expectation that people should be watching ads in the belief that that's going to help me in any way, because it really isn't. It's diddly squat as far as money is concerned. The amount of inconvenience that people are put to is wildly out of sync with like any compensation I get from it. It ain't worth it. But YouTube expects me to do this stuff, and I feel as if they will handicap me if I don't. So I have had the tendency to go with whatever the default is that they say you should do as far as running the advertisements are concerned. It's like, oh, default, okay, click OK, go ahead. And then I assume that if the stuff bothers you, you got to run a blocker like I do. Other than that, it's like, so don't feel guilty if you're doing that. Goodness, no. But I'm not sure how comfortable I feel about intentionally switching off the stuff that YouTube wants to default to on. So, I don't know. We will see. Like, if it becomes a recurring thing and people are really bothered by it, I can run the risk of like ticking YouTube off and not doing stuff the way they want it done, because it's not going to be that aggressive. It'll be just like dialing back a particular thing that they've included or that they've added. But that's why the mid-roll ads and stuff. I have no expectation that people should be wanting to watch those. I certainly don't. And it is 12:46, so it's certainly time for me to log off. But while I am doing that, let me fool around a little bit and see if I can get to this link while I've got you on stream. Dum-de-dum. I've got a guy going, there is way more meaningful stuff to do with sound than dithering. Oh, he's completely right. I've just got this stuff that I'm working through. I see Lorenzo's post. I think that's on the drums thing. Yep. Okay, I found it. It's hidden beneath the read more. That's why I didn't get it. So, and I'm not going to hear anything right now because I'm in streamer mode, but I'm getting to a video. Well, I'll be. You've linked me to the video of the hardware I've got. Interesting. That just made things much more interesting, because if this is the thing that you want, I have one. I have a Heritage Audio successor. So if I'm supposed to be listening to something about this, this is a way that I can investigate. Actually, come to think of it, tell me whether that is the diode bridge one that you want. I am, as promised, going to drag it to my desktop so that I can investigate it further, because I can't hear anything from it right now. But yeah, tell me whether that is the one that you have in mind. Because if that's the one that you have in mind, that's actually a very interesting news, because I'm touching one right now. I'm not using it any longer because I didn't end up liking what it was doing on my stereo bus enough, mostly because it's not a true peak limiter, so it was able to do the squish thing, although it was a little noisier than I like, but it wasn't able to catch peaks, and my synthesizer stuff spits out insane peaks. But if the successor is the kind of diode bridge you're talking about, then I have a wonderful opportunity to study them. So, I don't know, I guess let me know about that. I will go and watch this video on them now. And having said that, let me bid you good day for now. Oh, so Rupert Neve made the first one. There's a video where he talks about it, and I do know that the successor is modeled on the Neve designs. So that's a good point. Looks like I will do some research, and I will see whether there's anything that I can incorporate into plugins. Because honestly, I haven't spent that much time looking into how this is done. And I wasn't all that excited by the sound of it. Honestly, I've got one. It's better than any other compressor that I've had, but it still didn't wind up being the end-all and be-all for me. But I guess that counts as good news as far as you're concerned, seeing as the thing that you're pointing me to is something that I can study in person. So, and it's cool. Like I said, I'm touching one right now. It is off because I'm not using it in my signal path right now, but I have one. I can study it. I'll see what I can do as far as that. And first, I'm going to research more about what this diode bridge stuff is so that I can work out whether there's anything about it that translates into software in a useful way. Now, Mike, bear in mind that I'm not going to do a mimic of hardware units or other people's brand named stuff. That's not how I roll. But if I can learn about why some of these things do the things that they do, like with capacitor 2, where that is modeling a behavior of particular components, and what the component does can be translated into software in a way where software by default does not do that thing. So if I can identify what happens with the diode bridge in a way that I can translate it into software, you'll get it. In fact, if I can do it and it's exciting, you might get it really quick. But if I don't find anything distinct about that, it will take longer for me to come up with something to do. Anyways, I will talk to you guys later. And off to watch a video and also get a bit of rest. And back into the breach. And I'm also moving step by step towards doing other music again in 2 different ways. One of them being the hardware or the Space House stuff I was talking about. But the other way would be more interactive and less product and less music output organized. And that would be me getting together with you guys to do VCV rack stuff. And again, I don't expect that to produce music that I'm going to care about significantly, but it will be more interactive, and it'll be more like, here's how you do this, here's how you do that, here's how you make this kind of bass, here's how you do this kind of thing. And that'll be interesting. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.